The year is 1933. 1 in 4 Americans is unemployed. Banks have closed overnight. Entire farms have blown away in the dust. And yet, families are eating. Children are fed. People are warm. Not because the government came through in time, not because Wall Street recovered fast enough, but because ordinary people knew things, real, physical, practical things, skills passed down through generations that no financial collapse could erase from their hands or their memory. Here's the part nobody teaches in history class: that knowledge didn't disappear on its own. It was quietly pushed out, crowded off kitchen shelves and out of family memory, replaced by packaged products, monthly utility bills, and a consumer economy that needed you to stop trusting your own hands and start trusting their supply chain instead. What you're about to read isn't nostalgia. This is a working manual. 20 lost survival techniques from the Great Depression, tested under real collapse conditions, that work just as powerfully today as they did 90 years ago. Stay with this until the end, because number 17 alone could save you hundreds of dollars this winter. Before chemical companies started charging $12 for a bottle of drain cleaner, your great-grandmother solved the same problem for free, using something she already had sitting in the fireplace every single morning. She collected wood ash in a clay pot, poured rainwater slowly through it, and caught the dark liquid that dripped out the bottom. That liquid was lye water, potassium hydroxide, and it was one of the most powerful cleaning agents in the entire Depression household. Pour it carefully down a greasy kitchen drain and it dissolved fat buildup the way nothing else could. Mix it with rendered animal fat, let it cure for several weeks, and it became hard soap. Work it sparingly into stubborn laundry stains before washing, and it lifted the kind of ground-in grime that scrubbing alone couldn't touch. A single winter's worth of fireplace ash produced enough lye water to handle most of a family's cleaning needs for the entire following year. The ash was free. The rainwater was free. The only ingredient required was patience. Chemical companies didn't replace this system because they offered something better. They offered something packaged, branded, and dependent on a supply chain that needed to exist for you to function. Once you see that distinction clearly, you start seeing the same pattern repeat across almost every category of household life. Apple peels, pear cores, grape skins left over from jelly making. In a Depression kitchen, these scraps went into a wide-mouthed jar with water and a small amount of sugar, covered with a cloth to keep out insects while allowing airflow, and left on a warm shelf for several weeks. The natural yeasts present on fruit skin fermented the sugars into alcohol. Naturally occurring bacteria then converted that alcohol into acetic acid, which is simply vinegar. The resulting apple scrap vinegar was used for salad dressing, pickling cucumbers, cleaning windows, and treating sunburn. It cost nothing beyond what would otherwise have been thrown into the compost pile. A family that put up a batch every autumn had a full year's supply of vinegar from fruit peels alone. The practice teaches something more valuable than the vinegar itself, that there is almost no such thing as kitchen waste if you understand what each scrap is genuinely capable of becoming. Families who kept sheep discovered that the lanolin naturally present in raw wool, the greasy yellow substance that coats each fiber before washing, was one of the most effective skin protectors and barrier moisturizers available anywhere. Hands cracked raw from cold and field work, rubbed with raw lanolin, healed noticeably faster than with nothing at all. Lanolin kept leather boots from cracking through hard winters. It waterproofed canvas work jackets when rubbed in and allowed to soak overnight. It prevented rust from forming on metal tools stored through wet months. A family with sheep effectively had a free, self-replenishing supply of one of the most versatile, natural substances in existence, simply as a byproduct of shearing animals they were already keeping for wool. The cosmetics industry now sells lanolin back to consumers in premium moisturizers, at prices that would have seemed absurd to anyone who once kept a small flock. The substance has not changed at all. Only the packaging and the price have. The nose-to-tail philosophy that high-end restaurants now charge premium prices to celebrate, was not a culinary trend in Depression America. It was simple arithmetic. When a family butchered a hog, every part had a purpose, because every part represented money and labor they could not afford to squander. The liver was sliced and fried the day of butchering when it was freshest. The kidneys went into a savory pie. The heart was stuffed and roasted slowly. The feet were simmered for hours into a collagen-rich broth that gelled when cool, providing a base for weeks of soups. The skin was scraped and fried into crackling. The head was simmered, the meat picked clean from the bones and pressed into head cheese. The fat was rendered into lard for cooking and baking. The bones were cracked for marrow, then simmered again into stock. A single hog fed a family for months. Not because there was more meat on the animal than we imagine today, but because nothing edible was ever discarded. Modern meat processing renders into low-value industrial products the very same parts Depression families ate with genuine appreciation. We've traded comprehensive nutrition for the convenience of boneless, skinless packaging and paid considerably more for considerably less in return. There was no such thing as a disposable product in the Depression household because the concept itself would have seemed like deliberate, inexcusable waste. Diapers were cut from old flannel shirts and flour sacks, washed with lye soap, boiled to sanitize, and reused for years. A family needed perhaps 24 cloth diapers total for the full diapering years of one child. The same principle applied across everything in the household. Handkerchiefs replaced tissues. Cloth napkins replaced paper ones. Old sheets torn into strips became bandages. Worn-out wool sweaters were unraveled and the yarn rewound onto a ball, then knitted into something entirely new and useful. Nothing with remaining life in it was thrown away. The post-war disposables industry spent decades making convenience synonymous with progress. Americans now generate over 4 pounds of solid waste per person per day. Much of it products designed from the outset to be used once and replaced. A Depression household generated a fraction of that. The sheer volume of modern daily waste would have seemed genuinely incomprehensible to anyone who lived through the 1930s. Long before the word probiotic appeared on a food label, Depression families were fermenting vegetables in simple ceramic crocks using nothing but salt, water, and thyme. Cabbage packed tightly in salt and left to ferment in its own brine became sauerkraut over 2 to 3 weeks. Cucumbers submerged in salt brine with a few grape leaves and a clove of garlic became naturally sour pickles, without a single drop of added vinegar. The fermentation process is driven by naturally occurring lactobacillus bacteria present on the surface of raw vegetables. Given the right salt concentration and the right temperature, those bacteria multiply and produce lactic acid, which both preserves the food and dramatically increases its nutritional value. Fermented vegetables contain significantly higher levels of B vitamins than their fresh counterparts, and they support gut health in ways that pasteurized commercial products cannot begin to replicate. A 5-pound head of cabbage and a few tablespoons of salt produced a full quart of sauerkraut that kept for months at cellar temperature. A small jar of raw fermented sauerkraut at a health food store today costs $5 to $7. Depression families made it by the gallon from a vegetable they grew themselves, as a practical means of keeping the harvest alive through winter. Families who kept even 1 or 2 hives had access to a substance that functioned simultaneously as wood preservative, thread conditioner, leather waterproofer, candle material, and food sealant. Beeswax rubbed into wooden furniture and cutting boards sealed the grain against moisture and cracking. Thread drawn across a block of beeswax before sewing slid through fabric more smoothly and resisted breaking under tension. Leather boots treated with beeswax shed water and stayed supple through the wettest seasons. For food preservation, melted beeswax was poured over stored cheeses to seal them against mold and air. It was also used to coat the lids of preserving jars before the modern canning lid became standard. A small amount of wax went an extraordinarily long way, and a productive hive produced far more than any single family could use, creating surplus to trade with neighbors. Modern households buy separate products for every single one of these applications. Furniture polish, thread conditioner, leather waterproofing spray, candles, cheese wax, each sold individually, each purchased repeatedly throughout the year. One block of beeswax once handled all of it at the same time. When well water tasted off, or when a family was uncertain of a water source during travel or after flooding, Depression-era households used activated charcoal as a basic but highly effective water filter. Charcoal made by burning wood in a low-oxygen environment was crushed and layered with clean sand inside a wooden barrel with drainage holes cut into the bottom. Water filtered through it, with the charcoal absorbing organic contaminants and improving both taste and clarity significantly. This was not a sophisticated laboratory process. It was practical knowledge drawn from generations of careful observation. Charcoal's extraordinary surface area. A single gram of activated charcoal has a surface area roughly equivalent to a tennis court. Physically absorbs contaminants as water passes through it. That same mechanism underlies the modern water filtration technology we now purchase in plastic pitcher filters for $25. The charcoal cost nothing beyond the labor of making it. The wood came from the farm or the surrounding forest. Families in flood-prone regions kept a barrel filter as standard household equipment, refilling it with fresh charcoal periodically, and relying on it without drama, without expense, and without any monthly subscription. A family with a spinning wheel, a few sheep, and the skill to use both was a family that never went without warm clothing, regardless of what the broader economy was doing. Raw wool shorn in spring was washed, carded to align the fibers, spun into yarn on the wheel, and knitted into socks, sweaters, mittens, and hats through the autumn and winter months. Knitting was not a leisure activity in the Depression household. It was productive work done in every spare moment, while listening to the radio in the evening, sitting on the porch, riding in the wagon to town. A skilled knitter could complete a pair of heavy work socks in 3 to 4 hours of accumulated time. A pair of wool socks cost 30 cents at the general store. The wool to make them cost almost nothing for a family with its own small flock. The ready-to-wear clothing industry that expanded dramatically after World War II positioned home knitting and sewing as unnecessarily time-consuming. It was time-consuming. That was never the point. The point was that time was the one resource Depression families had in relative abundance, and they converted it directly into goods they would otherwise have had to pay for. Families who kept even a small backyard flock during the Depression understood that chickens were not simply producing eggs, they were producing one of the most nitrogen-rich fertilizers available for the kitchen garden, at zero additional cost. Chicken manure, aged or composted for several months to prevent burning plant roots, was worked into garden beds each spring before planting. A small flock of 10 to 15 hens produced enough manure through the winter months, collected from the coop floor, and composted with straw or wood shavings to fertilize a substantial vegetable garden. And then, the circle completed itself perfectly. The garden fed the family, the kitchen scraps fed the chickens fertilized the garden. The system was entirely self-reinforcing and required almost no external inputs once properly established. Modern gardeners spend considerable money on bagged fertilizers, many of which are petroleum-derived synthetic nitrogen products. A Depression-era fertilizer system cost nothing, improved soil structure as well as fertility, and was produced automatically as a byproduct of keeping animals already being raised for eggs. A Depression-era farmer did not buy a new axe because the handle cracked. He cut a new handle from a straight-grained piece of ash or hickory, shaped it carefully with a draw knife, fitted it to the head, and drove a wedge to lock it solidly in place. The axe head, properly maintained, could outlast a dozen handles. The same uncompromising logic applied to everything in the household. Worn plow points were reforged by the local blacksmith. Broken harnesses were stitched back together with leather needles and waxed thread. Cracked wooden tool handles were wrapped and reinforced rather than discarded. The skill set required to maintain tools rather than replace them was considered basic competence for any working adult, not a specialty or a hobby. The disposable tool economy that developed from the 1960s onward relies entirely on making repair seem more expensive than replacement. When a plastic-handled tool costs $8 and a replacement part costs $4, the math appears to favor buying new. What that calculation excludes is the landfill cost, the manufacturing energy, and the quiet erosion of a community's ability to maintain what it owns across generations. Depression-era homesteads caught and stored rainwater as a matter of course, not as a sustainability statement but as simple practical sense. Barrels positioned beneath downspouts filled during every storm and provided water for the garden through dry spells without drawing on the well at all. In regions where well water was hard, high in calcium and magnesium, rainwater was actually preferred for laundering, because its natural softness allowed soap to lather far more effectively. Less soap was needed per wash as a result, which reduced costs further in a household where every cent was accounted for. Rainwater collection required no technology more sophisticated than a barrel and a simple screen to keep out mosquitoes. A single good storm could fill several barrels within an hour. Those barrels carried the garden through a dry week without anyone making a decision or spending money bar mud. The water was simply there, caught and waiting exactly when it was needed most. Municipal water systems and metered billing have made rainwater collection seem unnecessary. The practical result is that homeowners now pay for treated water to irrigate gardens when unchlorinated rainwater, which plants genuinely prefer, falls completely free from the sky. Pull back from the individual tricks for a moment and look at what every single one of them shares. Every technique on this list is built on the same underlying principle, that the resources you actually need are almost always closer than the market wants you to believe. Fat in the pan becomes soap and candles. Ash from the fire becomes a cleaning agent. Rain from the sky waters the garden. Scraps from the kitchen feed the chickens that fertilize the garden that feeds the family. The circle closes completely, and almost nothing leaves the system as waste. What the Depression generation understood, and what the post-war consumer economy spent decades systematically dismantling, was that dependence is not a natural state. It is purchased. Every time you learn to do something yourself that you previously paid someone else to do, you recover a piece of your household's resilience. You are not just saving money. You are reducing the number of external systems that need to function correctly in order for your family to eat, stay warm, and stay healthy. These people were not surviving despite their circumstances. They were thriving because of what they knew. That knowledge still exists. It still works. And the only thing standing between you and it is the decision to learn it before you need it, because when you need it is exactly the wrong time to start. That is what the prepper's survival blueprint is built on. Not fear, capability.